Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector and you're watching the Broken Meeple channel. This is where I talk and rant about board games, usually more the latter. This is the new venture from Sit Down Games, Open Season, which they told me about last year, but only had base information. And Sit Down Games have done pretty well for me so far. I mean, the latest couple of ventures that they've done, Redwood and Tawanaku, both sit on my shelf and both got seals of distinction from me. And by the way, thank you for publishing my seal in your marketing material. I was really pleased to see that. But this one, Open Season, is quite different to those two. This one feels more like a card game with an optimization puzzle thrown in. Only about an hour long, so it's definitely shorter than those two, and it just appears like a fairly simple game. So I'm certainly down for trying out new ones by them. The question is, will this continue the trend of solid games, or is this one going to be forgettable?
Get on with it.
So in this game, you are effectively playing some monster lord or whatever who's got sick and tired of adventurers coming around and ransacking his dungeon, that he's declared open season and decided to take matters into his own hands by going out and, well, essentially removing their heads on a very large scale. Yeah, you are basically building up this collection of adventurers' heads on your wall, which is essentially on your board here, and players are doing it in such a way as to score victory points by various methods of optimization and cool combo building. And that's kind of the gist of the game, although that theme is pretty much lost instantly. We'll talk about that more later. But the idea is that there are 11 rounds and there is a deck of cards with a ton of these different adventurer heads. Now, there's only several varieties and a few attributes of each, and this is not all the cards. I mean, this is just a small amount I've taken out of the box. Trust me, there is a lot of them in here. So you've certainly got a big deck of cards. But what will happen is that there will basically be 5 of these heads laid up in what they call the inn, but essentially the display. And then what you do is that you take 2 cards from this display, you look at them both and decide, right, one of these is going to go on my wall, in which case I've got to choose which slot it goes in, and the other one goes on top of a deck pile, which is essentially called your stock. Your stock is kind of like a holding pen for certain cards for the remainder of the turn while you do other actions. By the time it gets to your next turn, the stuff that is in your stock will go into what's called your accolades, and these accolades, combined with the cards that are on your wall, will essentially dictate how you're scoring points for the game. But it's not a simple case of just, oh, I'll just put a card on a slot and one in my stock. No, the way that you put them on your board and what is in your accolades will dictate a lot of your point scoring by the end of the game. Spaces on your board will give you points for having certain types of heads in your accolades. Some of these will determine, all right, if I've got fighters in my accolades, you know, they all have an attribute symbol on the top corner. Let's say I've got a bunch of fighters in my accolades. Well, if I've got a fighter on one of my slots here, I'll get points for having lots of fighters. So that way I want to collect those. But then some of them are negative points. You know, if I put something here, I'm going to get, you know, -3 points for each barbarian head I shove in there. And it's like, well, I better not get any barbarian heads in my accolades. I might want to avoid those. But then there's other restrictions on here. Some of these require you to put different types of heads, so you can't have the same. Some of them actually give you bonus points for having the same head on various spots. There are bonus actions that you can trigger if you have something on top of your stock that matches what's on your wall. So it's essentially a puzzle, like a puzzle that develops as the game goes on. You're setting yourself, like your goals for the game are being set by your accolades. Because I might decide, right, I've got a bunch of these cards, okay, let's see, and as they come up, here we go, there's a few dwarfs. So I've got a couple of dwarfs in my accolades, for example. Well, if I'm going to make use of those, they had better be attributes that will score heavily on here, or maybe they should be, you know, ones that I've put in my slot to say, oh, if I've got lots of dwarf heads, I'll get points for dwarfs, so therefore they're the ones I'm going to collect. But this display in the middle is only worth 5 cards, and so you're only going to have so much choice in each round, and you have to put a card down whether you like it or not. There is 11 spaces, there's effectively 11 rounds, there's not a lot you can do about it if you don't like the cards you get. So to avoid having to put any face down or put them in bad spots, you've got to try and make the best of what's available. During the game, you'll be able to pick up certain trophy tokens, which essentially add to the bonuses that you get from certain cards in your accolades. You might be able to pick up a wild token, which can let you change the attribute of a head in your accolades to better match some of the points you're about to get. And there are even some little tiles that you can collect where you can get bonus trophy tokens or increase the points value of diversity of the attribute markers, again, depending on where you put stuff and in what round you put them in, because some of these will only trigger if you put them on there in certain rounds. And then essentially at the end of 11 rounds, you look at the cards in your accolades compared to what's on your wall, total it all up on this fairly lengthy score sheet, and see who's the winner.
That's easy!
Open Season is a pretty quick game all round. The box claims 15 minutes per player, no solo mode, so you're playing this with 2 to 4, I mean, it's pretty accurate. 30 to 60 minutes is about as long as this game should take with that many players. In no way should it take more than an hour. And that's probably including the teach, because there's not a huge amount of rules in this book to explain. Here, you've got an icon guide at the back, but once you've got past the initial setup, there's only about, I'd say, 5 pages you need to read, and one of those is a very lengthy scoring example, and you're already away. So the teaching doesn't take very long, and the game is only 11 rounds, and all you've got to do is basically take 2 cards and decide where they're going on your board and in your stockpile. So it really is only dictated by how long it takes somebody to think about that. The game should only drag out if somebody is chronically AP, but honestly, I've yet to encounter that big a deal with this one. Done and dusted in an hour. Pretty good going, and so refreshing considering the games we've had to deal with lately.
Making it bigger doesn't make it clearer.
And the rules aren't complicated at all. I mean, this book only has about 5 pages you need to read, one of which is a very good comprehensive scoring example, and we'll get onto the reasons why you might need to really use that in a minute. But there's not a lot of rules in this game to learn, and this 6-step turn sequence is broken down into the most minuscule of steps. I mean, it's 6 steps, but all you've got to do is basically this. Refill the display to 5 cards. Okay, cool. Stock moves into your accolades from the previous turn. Okay, cool. Choose 2 cards. Right, cool. Put 1 on your wall, put 1 on your stock, and then, depending on which order you did it, trigger 1 or more actions if possible. That's your 6 steps. And then your turn is over and next person's turn. There really isn't a lot to teach about the general turn sequence. Now, where this game trips up a little bit is the way that all these different slots interact with the scoring. And annoyingly, there isn't really any reference aids to go on to help you with that. The back of the book has the iconography at a glance, which is fine, but the iconography is pretty self-explanatory. There's not a lot there that's particularly confusing, but you know, the ones that you're not entirely sure of are on the back of the book, or you can easily find them in here. But where people do tend to trip up is the scoring sheet. The scoring example has got quite a lot of different ways that these things link together in terms of scoring. So you've got like, right, I lose points for that type of head, I lose points for that type of head, I get points for that one, points for that one, but if I've managed to get all 3 of them different in here, and I've got the most of the elvish heads in there, therefore I get another 10, and then if I go here, I get 2 points for this attribute, but then I also get 7 points, not 4 points now for the attribute diversity. There's quite a few ways you score. And unfortunately, there isn't some convenient aid to help people remember how it works. I mean, you could give them like the score pad, but that's not the most effective way of doing it. Now, the book does have you covered to an extent with a fantastic scoring example. It's 1 page at the back, and I cannot recommend enough that you make this known to the players when you're teaching the game. But still, it would have been nice to have had a bigger reference aid of the detailed explanation for the scoring sheet. So what I've done is I've uploaded a file to Board Game Geek, you can thank me later, for basically just a Word document with the snapshot of the rules explanation in the book, copied down so that you can print it off and laminate it. That's what I'm going to do for this game, and it just makes teaching the scoring a bit easier. Now, that is the only blemish. Otherwise, this game's a very simple one to learn and to get going, but just you might have to worry about some people going, hang on a minute, how does that score again? I'm not sure which of the 2 of these is really best for me, and you really want to help them understand the scoring part.
I don't get it.
This game is an example of those type of games where you have more choice to begin with, but then your choice gets more limited as the game goes on. You've got 11 slots to put a character head on. So that may seem like, oh yeah, I've got all sorts. I mean, where should I put my first one? I guess I could put it there, I could put it there. What difference does it make? But some of these spaces give you, like, you know, bonuses or even potentially penalties if you put the heads on them at certain times of the game. For example, there's points you can earn for having diversity of the attributes, so fighters and thieves and stuff like that. There's 5 different attributes, therefore if you get all 5 it will give you a certain amount of points. If you put a head on this square though, early on, say in rounds 1 to 4, you get to increase the points value of having the diverse attributes. So you might think, well, why don't I just do that all the time? Problem is, by doing that, you're also setting the precedent for which head in your accolades is going to be negative points by the end of the game. So you might decide, you know what, I'd rather wait until my accolades have built up a bit before I start putting something on the negative spaces. But then there are other ones like that. I mean, you've got here, you can get trophy tokens depending how early you put it on this one. But again, negative points for that head. Do I want to do it early or should I wait a little bit? And then there's one over here where you can get bonus trophy tokens if you do it around the middle of the game. The only problem is you then give yourself a penalty at the end of the game, which is that for certain, for your lowest amount of a certain attribute, you'll get negative points as well. So you've already got placement restrictions based on round number, but even then, just the idea of every time you're adding to this board, you are effectively losing in terms of like choices where you can put another head. And when the display is, heads that you may not have wanted or heads that you're searching for, you're thinking, right, well, I'll take these two, but wait a minute, if I put that there, I could do that action, that would be cool, but I don't have anything in my stock matches, that's not going to work. I don't want to put something there because I don't have a lot of these in my accolades, therefore I don't want to have a bunch of, elvish heads there. So which one do I put? Do I take these two? Maybe I should leave them behind. Gotta put something out. Where am I going to put it? And this game kind of has that in spades. Now, it's not that the game gets so restrictive and punishing by the time it gets later on, but in a kind of a similar vein to something like Hanamakoji, that little card game that I've talked about a lot from Empress 4. That's a game where, when you do certain actions, you have more options at the start of the round, but less information to go on. Well, this is kind of a similar vein. You have more information you have more options at the start of the round because you've got 11 spots and you can kind of cherry pick how you're going to do it. But you don't have as much information about which ones are going to be good because you haven't built up a stash of accolades yet. So as the round goes on, you know what you're aiming for, but now you don't have as much choice as to where to put it. So it's quite a cool little balance that you've got to do, and it does lead to some really, good fun angst. When you're looking at the display, you take two cards knowing that these are the cards you want, and you're like, well, I could put it there, maybe I should wait, maybe I should put it there, and, not like brain burning or anything like that, but just enough to make your choices feel meaningful. Now, there are 3 ways you can play this game, although as much as I don't like variants, I think that this one kind of works. You essentially play the normal game, which is as you see the board here. You have 11 turns and it all takes place on here. Now, you can play a shorter game, where basically the scoring is a little bit simplified and there's only, I believe, like 9 slots rather than 11, and there's not a huge amount that interlinks the lot. Now, this is the kind of variance I actually like in the board game, a long and short variant, particularly if the game is too long. But to be honest, the long version isn't exactly that long, so after I tried the short version, it's not one I would ever really return to. I would just simply use the long version. Now, if you're playing this with younger children, maybe a family setting or first-time gamers, then by all means use the short game version so that they can get the hang of the mechanics, and then you can just instantly switch to this version and never look back. So I like the fact that they've included it, and it's not taking up any extra component space, but yeah, once you've tried the short version, you'll probably just stick with the long version. You also have some bonus tiles that you can introduce into the game, which allow you to trigger more scoring opportunities depending on what you put on your board. These I can take or leave. I mean, it's cool to have them sometimes, this is essentially like playing the advanced version of Open Season. You've only got 7 of them in the game, 3 of them you're not going to use, so you've got 4 of them, so it adds a bit of variety, a way to spice up the game, but this is kind of like you're kind of like an equivalent of a mini expansion for the game. I am perfectly happy to play this game on the normal board without these tokens, particularly if I'm playing with people for the first time. But if you've got people who are going to play this more than once, that they're already used to the mechanics, then by all means throw these in and you might not never look back at this regard. But I like this kind of spread of variants here. A long version, a short version, and an advanced version. I think that works because they don't fundamentally change the nature of the game. There is still clearly a way that the designer expected this to be played. They're just allowing for some different scopes of what people will play this game, from seasoned gamers to brand new gamers. I'm totally down for that. Now, I think this game is going to be hurt somewhat because of its aesthetics. It's not that the aesthetics are bad, but there really is nothing to write home about here. I mean, the artwork on these heads is fine. I mean, again, it's a little bit on the bland side. There's nothing here that really stands out. The whole game is one big collage of dark green. As much as green is my favorite color, that doesn't mean that it necessarily suits what's going on here. The box cover is fine, there's your Monster Lord and there's all the heads. But if you looked at this box and saw the title Open Season, would you know that you were getting essentially an optimization card puzzle? Nope. You'd be thinking, oh, I'm this big lord, I'm going to go out and slay some mofos and put the heads on my wall. That's not what this game is like. I mean, the theme is pretty much pasted on as you wouldn't believe. You could have easily just made this about animal heads, but of course, that would have got a lot of comments from people had you tried to make this an actual hunting game for obvious reasons. Oh, come on! It doesn't really stand out. If you saw this on the shelf, you wouldn't really pick it up. The title isn't really selling it, and nor are the aesthetics. Again, not bad, just nothing special. But they all function fine. I mean, the fold-out board is, perfectly functional. You get a lot of score sheets. The cards are fairly sturdy. I'll give them that, actually. They haven't got any special finish or anything, but they do feel like stiff. They feel like stiff cards, so this isn't one that I think you really need to sleeve. I think you could, the cards only get handled so much. You pick up 2 cards, you put one down and put one on your stocks, so sleeving this I think would be a waste. The variety of this game is a little lacking as well. I did mention that there are 3 ways to play the game, but the only real variety that is added is these bonus tiles, in the sense that you use only 4 out of the 7 that are there. But that's kind of it. You will pretty much never really look back at the short version once you've played it. So you're essentially playing this 11 card one here, and these heads won't change, the attributes won't change, the composition of the deck won't change. It will just simply be a case that 5 cards come out, and will you find the heads that you want? But the scoring, type doesn't change, only that you might just, you might differ slightly on whether you put certain cards in these round-specific slots earlier or later or not at all. That's really the only way that the game kind of changes up, which does mean that there's not a huge amount of variety, but that's not to say that the replay value is terrible. The game itself is still fun, and this puzzle is still a cool, simple one to do, but there's not no way that you can kind of go, right, this board, these actions now do this each turn, or, now we only use certain heads, or these heads have got a special attribute attached to them, like the elvish heads give you this ability, and the barbarians give you this ability. There's nothing like that, which I grant, is to keep the game simple, but it is very much, this is what you get, and not much else on top. There's also nothing here to do with player scaling. There's no solo mode, and I don't care, alright? Not every game needs a solo mode. You don't get marked down just because you decided to buck the trend and not put a solo mode for no reason. But with 2 to 4 players, nothing changes. Nothing. The way the cards are done, the way the scoring is done, the way your board looks, the bonus tiles, nothing. Nothing changes with player count, 2 to 4. So each player simply adds time and nothing else. Now granted, it's still not going to take longer than about an hour with 4 players, so it's not like that's a drastic thing. Although the display becomes more of a factor here, because you always refill at the start of every player's turn back up to 5 cards here. But that means that if you are the 4th player and first player is taking their turn, you're looking at that display and you can kind of ignore it for the most part, because, well, I take these 2, alright, well there's 2 of yours gone. Okay, next, and then I refill back to these. Next player takes these 2. Okay, cool. And then 2 more come out. And then third player takes these 2. And there we go. And now that display looks entirely different from what it did a couple of turns ago. This can also lead to an element of AP, not a huge amount, as I mentioned before, but just a little bit for 4-player games where you can't really decide on which ones you're going to take until essentially the turn before it's yours at best. So 2 turns before, you're kind of just twiddling your thumbs and waiting for stuff to happen. So a little bit of downtime can exist. Again, these are not crazy amounts. The game will still only take about an hour to finish. But certainly with 2 players, this bit gets a little bit more tactical because you can see what your opponent is grabbing and what they want and what they don't want. So you can kind of base it on there. 3-player is kind of a sweet spot in between. 4-player just makes this a little bit chaotic, but again, no big deal. The game's an hour done and dusted. If it was longer, this would be more of a problem. So Open Season is a fine little game from Sit Down Games. This is not quite on the caliber level of something like Redwood or Tawanaku from before, but it does the job. It's not really trying to be anything bigger than it actually is. It's a card optimization puzzle with a fairly pasted theme that will give you some decent turn angst, and for the most part is really quick and easy to learn and play. That is kind of its selling points. The fact that this is going to give you a decent amount of meaningful choices, but not take forever to play, particularly if you play this with less than 4 players, it won't take very long at all. It's good that it gives you a couple of options of how to play if you are dealing with seasoned gamers versus non-gamers. Mainly the negatives I have are mainly kind of small fry, like, you know, the aesthetics being a bit on the bland side and the fact that the replay value is only so much here. Really, the main negative is just the fact that, you know, trying to teach this game does involve you having to really emphasize how the scoring works because of the lack of decent aids available to players to resolve that or to make it easier for them. Now, I fixed that by putting the file on Board Game Geek, but it would have been nice to have thrown some of those in this box. But it's cool. I mean, this is one that I like to play every now and again. I don't think it's one that I'd want to do like multiple games of in a row, but what it sets out to do, it does just fine. It's just not blowing the doors off. And maybe after a while you might, you know, find that, you know, doing this whole thing is going to require you to use these bonus tiles, whether you're, you know, seasoned gamers or not, because you just want that little bit of extra variety to spice it up. But overall, I'm giving Open Season a good 7 out of 10. It's a decent game, you know, not, again, on the sort of caliber of Tawanaku and Redwood. I mean, those are seal of distinction games. I think I gave both of them a 9 out of 10. They are really solid. But Open Season is still one that I recommend giving a look. It won't take very much of your time, but it's got some cool little combo card building, some nice simple rules. It's just not necessarily innovating in any particular way or blowing the doors off. That's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek when it goes live on the page. If you want to know more about sit-down games, then by all means check out my reviews for Tawanaku and Redwood, which are both on this channel. I'll put links in the description at the end of this video so that you can find them. And by all means, let me know your comments down below about what you think of this game and kind of like the rest of sit-down games' catalogue, really. Let's just talk about sit-down games in general. Until next time, regardless of whether you think a dwarf head or a little halfling head will look better on your wall, it's still only a game, as long as it looks good and doesn't start rotting in the place. Take care, and bye for now.